Hello and welcome to the Choralosophy Podcast. This is episode 203, Programming as Storytelling with Donald Nally. Later in this episode, Donald will say that it is not my job to answer the questions. It's my job to ask the questions, which I found to be a fascinating portion of our discussion. Programming for our choirs carries with it a wide range of challenges, from the skill levels of our groups and their needs to the considerations of speaking to an audience. There are many ways to wrestle with this balance. Renowned conductor of the Crossing, Donald Nally, joins me this week to think through the programming questions from his perspective as both a director who has worn the professor hat, as well as being the conductor of a high-level professional ensemble. Donald shares his general philosophy and practice for creating a program that serves as its own piece of art. This episode gave me a lot to chew on for choosing repertoire for choirs at all levels. You will learn a lot from this conversation too, from discussion about music with political implications, programming for storytelling, considerations for sacred music in non-sacred choral contexts, and much more. The Crossing also has a new album called Motion Studies that serves as an interesting case study for the depth and breadth of what our art form is capable of communicating. So stick around, you will find this thought-provoking and fascinating. And once you've done that, head over to Choralosopher's Facebook page. Join the conversation there, as well as on the Substack, choralosophy.substack.com. Both are free places to join and learn more and dig deeper about all of the topics you hear on the show. Ludus, the platform trusted by thousands of organizers to power their event ticketing, marketing, and fundraising, has just upped its game with an incredible new feature, volunteer management. Now you can streamline your volunteer coordination like never before. Volunteers can easily sign up for opportunities and shifts online while you effortlessly approve signups, track hours, and manage your volunteer team. Say goodbye to volunteer management headaches and hello to seamless coordination with Ludus. Try it at ludus.com/choralosophy and revolutionize your events. Before we get into the meat of the show, I'm going to keep this quick. Big announcement. Super excited. All the choir teachers in the audience. Sight Reading Factory is introducing self-assessment. They should have it up and going and fully functional by the time the school year starts. I've been beta testing it for a while, and it is really, really good. And I am so excited to show you some demos on the social media, Choralosophy, so follow, be looking for that this summer. The hours and hours you've been spending self-grading could possibly be over. So don't forget to enter the Choralosophy checkout code when you renew your new and improved Sight Reading Factory membership for next school year. The producers and Inner Circle at Patreon are Brannigan Lawrence, Brian Long, Chandler Smith, Venture Studios, Jonah Clixbull, Angie Schilling, David Kowalczyk, DF, Kyle Peterson, Max Jackson, Michael Herron, Ryan Main, and Stephen Kathy Kakachik. Okay, everybody, I am here with Donald Nally, the conductor of The Crossing, and we're going to be having a great conversation today, I just know it, about his philosophy for programming, conducting, evoking sound, the mission of his ensemble as embodied by his own philosophy. So I'm excited to ask him all kinds of questions. Donald, welcome.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
So why don't you start out by just telling us a little bit about you? How did you kind of go from your origin story as a young person being introduced and inspired by music to directing one of the finer professional choirs in the world?
Well, thank you for saying that. Well, that's a journey. Boy, that's a loaded question. I've done like almost any kind of choir that you can imagine, that like in a kind of regular Western definition of that. So I, ever since I was an undergrad, I had a really keen interest in new music, but I had a long career as an opera chorus master on a couple of continents, and I did large symphonic choir, and I've done high Anglo-Catholic music, and I've done university music and chamber choir, and the classics and all of that kind of stuff. And so I feel like all of that was informing the fact that along the way I was commissioning when I could, because I'm really interested in telling our stories. And then I had a group of people around me here in Philadelphia that we eventually wound up doing everything together. We literally saw each other every single night of the week. We did opera chorus, and we did Choral Art Society of Philadelphia, and we did St. Mark's Church, and we went to Italy, to Spoleto in the summers for 6 weeks together. And and it was the same, like 20, 24 people all the time. And it was those people that after I moved to Wales said, hey, we should do a concert. That would be really fun. Let's just get back together and make some music. And so we did, and we commissioned a little piece for it because that's, I was really interested in it, and it went really well. Like it went so well that here we are ending our 19th season, even though the first one we would never have called a season. I don't think we would call the second or the third one a season either. So it really is just, a matter of like my interest, the interest of the singers around me. Of course, the that group of people has changed enormously because people's lives changed. But the idea of what the crossing is hasn't changed.
Right. So when you say the idea of what the crossing is hasn't changed, I'm taking this out of the story that you just told, where it's an association built around the people there with a common interest in making this music together. Even though the people have changed, how have you kept that sense even as the personnel changes over, as it obviously would have to over 19 years?
Well, the most important thing about a chamber choir is who's in the room.
Mm-hmm.
There isn't any more important factor. And that's particularly true when you're doing really thorny music and you have to have each other's backs. And, we have a really unique structure at the Crossing where we don't re-audition. Once you're in the corps, you're in the corps. And I have a strong philosophy about the fact that when you're doing the kind of music we do, you have to be able to like screw up all the time. You have to be able to take risks, go for it, and go, okay, that didn't work, or oops, sorry, that was an extremely loud wrong note, and then turn those risks into, emotional vulnerability that you do, that you put out in front of each other and in front of audiences. So
That's awesome. And that's relatively, you said it's a unique concept, but that is, I've sung in quite a few professional choruses over my life. And that is not typical. In fact, I think maybe you need one of my signs. Do you see that sign behind me?
thank you for your mistake.
Yeah. Yeah, you
Well,
might
I
need
wouldn't
one
go
of
that far.
those. Yeah. No, of course. It's actually one of my little catchphrases that I use in my classroom. When I teach high school, of course, it's a very different thing. But in order to get them to be good at it in general, I do have to ask them to just make noise. Just make noise. Step one, make noise. So I'm interested to hear a little bit more about that, how that exists in your professional environment, where obviously, yes, you would want them to be prepared. You would want them to not be winging it, and that's why the mistake happens. But so tell me the difference, say, between how you could conceive of maybe a beginning singer in their youth versus a professional singer, still creating that environment where people feel safe to occasionally screw up. How do you thread that needle?
Well, I just finished 11 years at Northwestern, and I did the same thing with my students there. I mean, just create an environment where people feel safe to say what's on their mind, and to and everybody's working at the highest caliber that they can. And that's the expectation. We don't really ever talk about that. And what makes the ensemble work is the fact that you are really working with each other as a unit. Listening is, next to who's in the room, listening is the next most important thing. The ability to listen to each other and to make room for each other all the time. Because what do we spend most of our time talking about is, quality of a chord and the value of a pit of a vowel, like the quality of a vowel, and tuning those types of things around the greater, kind of landscape of why we do what we do, which is not about vowels and rhythms and pitches. So I would say, if I understand your question correctly, I would say like creating, environments for people where they are, they're really excited about showing up at the top of their game, to find out what's going to happen, and to feel confident that what's going to happen isn't going to be met with um, rejection. It's going to be met with that's really interesting. I wouldn't have heard it that way. Let's do it that way. Or it's going to be met with, that's an interesting idea. I don't think so. Let's try this.
Hmm.
Um, with a choir like the Crossing, a lot of rehearsal is spent going, is that what she meant? Well, let's try this. Maybe she meant this, as we navigate pieces that no one's ever done before. So yeah, I don't know. That's not a great answer to your question, but it really is about it also the structure that we have therefore means that we know what each other is going to do. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
We can look on the page and we know that like if the baritone line is going up to a high E on an eval, everybody in the bass section knows who's going to do that well and who's going to lay out. Um,
Hmm.
we know the way to make the machine work.
Yeah. So it sounds like almost like there is a an attempt to get the security of the singers in the room to be at in such a place where, let's take the example of your baritone line going to the high E, right? Where in some environments where a singer might feel under pressure to prove themselves at all times, they might go up to that high E and make a really ugly sound because they are trying to, they don't know that it's okay to lay back. And so it sounds like what you're describing is a choir, even in a professional setting, that has really done the groundwork of team building prior to the music making.
Well, and the other thing is, let's continue this discussion about this high E. I'm very bothered by this high E right now, and like so also an environment in which we tried a couple times and go like, you know what, it's fine. The second tenors are going to take it, and everybody's like, great, good, thank you.
Yeah,
Not, oh my goodness,
you're a failure.
my
Right.
high E isn't appreciated.
Right.
Well, if you're basing your self-worth on whether or not you can like sing a single note on a particular vowel, you need a therapist, not a choir.
Yeah. And in a context, and I think that's how would you say that most of the singers in the Crossing are also soloists?
Yeah, they all
Yeah.
are. They all most of them have master's degrees either in voice or in conducting. I have a bunch of doctorates in conducting.
Yeah.
And,
Well,
so yeah.
the reason I ask is because, and I assumed that was the answer, but the reason I ask is because sometimes soloists do come into choral settings with the idea, if I'm a baritone, I probably have a really comfortable, easy high E, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's that my high E is going to work well in that context, in that song, with those other singers. And so sometimes there can be that sense of defensiveness of like, well, why does he not want my version of this, or why does the music not, and so it sounds like what you're doing is you've created, like, I think right off the bat of this conversation you just talked about creating an environment where that happens, and maybe you've been doing it long enough to where that environment has just been created gradually over time. Would you say that that's fair? You said you don't talk about it a whole lot, it just happens.
Yeah, I mean, I've grown, like, I'm not at all the person I was 15, 20, 25, 30, 35 years ago. Um, and the
In
singers
what
that
way?
what's
In what
that?
way? In what way?
Well, I used to be an asshole, uh, a lot. I would get very upset. I had this crisis that happened in the mid 90s with me where I was doing a lot of conducting and I was doing lots and lots of music and kind of on top of the world in a way, and I couldn't accept it. Um, and I felt that when people made mistakes, it was because they didn't care about the music. And um, I'll be honest with you, I had one of my closest friends in the world lives in Kansas City, and he came and he did a project with me that happened to be a project that was at the Philadelphia Orchestra. He came and did a project with me And after the project, he wrote me a letter and he said, I love you. And I've like, of the top 10 of musical experiences of my life, you've been the top 10 of musical experiences of my life. And I don't care if I ever sing with you again, because you're not in a place that accepts leadership. You're not in a good place about leading people. And so I had to go to my therapist. I've been in therapy my whole adult life. And if you would like to talk about that for 45 minutes, we can do that. But I'm happy to do it. Great advocate. There are therapists in Philadelphia who have big swimming pools with like big gazebos and stuff that I've built for them.
Um,
And but I had to really think about like why. And I went and I realized with my therapist that it wasn't that I was interpreting that they didn't care about the music. It was that I was making the mistake of whether or not they cared about me.
there you go. Yeah, I can identify with that very strongly. I would say, I'll turn 45 this year, um, and I would say that progression has already started in me, of just the difference as a teacher in a choral classroom, where I, in my early career, would have put a lot of pressure on myself to the way that the singers are responding is a reflection of whether or not they respect me enough to do these things, to XYZ, whatever it is. It sounds like that's kind of what you're describing. It was like it was,
It was this was life changing because it was
yeah.
also, I mean, I was also going through like this this opened up some of the father issues that were like why I
Mm.
was building therapist swimming pools with all that therapy. And so I, it was life changing. And luckily it happened in my mid 30s and not when I was 60, because I was able to at least identify the behavior and understand. And actually, what it led to was I left that job. And one of the reasons I left that job was because I realized that the job itself wasn't right for me.
Mm.
Um,
Hmm.
and that environment like brought out things in me that I didn't like about myself and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, the bottom line is that conducting is one great big long journey of learning a number of like roads, and they're connected, but they also are kind of separate. And one of them is like, who am I as a person in the world, and how do I understand where the music wants to go, independent of me, and
Hmm.
also who am I as a leader, right? Like who am I as a leader? And the great revelation, of course, is that you're not a leader, you just guide. And particularly when you're around, to be honest, people of the caliber that I am very fortunate to have been around for most of my adult life. I've spent my musical career in the midst of very big-brained people. And so at any rate, what we've come up with, whether it's good or bad, is an environment in which I like who I am, and I think most of the singers like who they are. And if you can find that place, you can do extraordinary things because the level of listening is intensely high and not spoken about.
Yeah, yeah, that's wonderful. And it sounds, of course, my world doing this show weekly means that I get to talk to people like yourself, but people, around the world and at all stages of the choral profession on a regular basis. And I hear some version of your story reflected in a lot of conductors. And I can see it, like I mentioned, in my own life too, but it's a lot of pressure to be the one at the front of the room. And we talk a lot. So often, choir directors will go and attend a professional development conference or whatever, where they're going to try to learn the best ways to use their arms to make a gesture, or the best ways to teach the singer, and all those things are important, and we have to like learn how to do those things. But there is always, it always comes back to this story like you told about I had to figure out something inside of myself that was causing me to disconnect in some way from what the music was trying to say. And I feel like this is it's almost like a spiritual journey that we all have to go through at some point in our life to be the conductor we probably all looked up to as a kid. And so I find that to be fascinating, and I wonder how that has impacted your your other kind of more choral core ideas. So, for example, if we could kind of take it into a more technical part of the conversation, you work with students and professionals. How do you consider your role as in that as the leader or as the guide? We'll use that term. How do you see your roles as different when you're working with students versus when you're working with the singers of the crossing? Or do you?
Not really.
Okay,
Although when you're working with the singers of the crossing, there's certain things that you take for granted, right? If we happen to be working with languages, which we very seldom do, but if we happen to be, there's just an assumption that everybody in the room is going to know how to speak those, or at least pronounce those languages, and how,
mm-hmm.
um, or if we, if I make a reference, to when we're doing a piece of, I don't know, Macmillan, and we make a reference to Howells or we make a reference to Handel or whatever, that those references will be understood by the people in the room, that I don't also have to explain, the other side of that. Whereas with students, sometimes, you gain pretty quickly and a good idea about, what their faces are telling you. And you go like, oh, that moment in Handel's Jephthah, the end of Act Two, where there's an amazing chorus, and they're looking at you going like, "Oh, you lost me at Jephthah," and that's fine, And then you take the moment to like give the backstory to that, and hope that they'll go off and discover the the miracle that is Handel's Jephthah, Act Two, and so the same is true. The same is true of some vocal stuff. Even there's
Yeah,
times when I'll just go, well, what do we? This isn't working. What do you think? What do you think you're doing here? Like, are you guys using OE and you guys using schwa, or and while I'll do that with my students as well, sometimes I have to make sure that we all know what I'm talking about when we're talking
sure.
about PA,
Yeah.
right? So
That
that
makes sense.
there's just a kind of like a level of at what point do you have to explain, but not to bring down the level of music making in any way, that or the expectation of the speed of the rehearsal or the expectation of the way people will show up. Because when in my teaching, I'm teaching professional training for conductors and for singers. So I'm teaching them what it's like to walk into the room at the crossing. But yeah, I mean, if you talk beyond a student, you know, again, you're not like you're wasting your time.
Yeah. Now, would you say that the doing those wearing those two hats simultaneously as you do you feel like this is a hypothetical and there's probably no way for you to know of this for sure, but I just want to know what you think. If you were to say snap your fingers and the crossing is no longer part of your life, you were only a professor at Northwestern. Do you think that in your current reality that being having your hand in what happens at the crossing raises the bar that you bring into your student environments at the university higher
Well,
than it otherwise would have been? There are lots of ways for you to get involved in the Choralosophy community. Of course, you can go over to choralosophy.substack.com and subscribe there for free or for pay if you would like to support the mission of this show. I would encourage you to do that. That's the place that we are now having contributions from the community, from people who are listening to the show, and from people who are wanting to add their voice to this conversation in the form of a blog. If you're interested in being a contributor to the Choralosophy community, email me at choralosophy@gmail.com and check out some of the submissions that are already there. I'm hoping for that program to really grow over the next year, so please consider reaching out.
yes, I mean, well, first of all, I'm no longer at Northwestern, so that's not a possibility.
Oh,
Um,
okay. Yeah, my
so,
apologies. Yeah.
but in theory, um, I'm definitely not finished teaching. I just needed a break for doing two like really high pressured
I
full-time
see.
jobs.
I see. Yep.
So we'll see. I don't know what the future holds. Um, but the but theoretically, yeah, I think that, again, like this is the tricky question. And you probably know why I'm stumbling here, because I do not want to diminish the teacher who goes into the junior high every day and meets them where they are and
Yep.
brings them to a better level and is inspiring and changes people's lives, not their musical lives, changes people's lives as a
Yep.
result of, making art with them and sharing, you know, uh, human truths with them and all of this kind of stuff. And that's the most, noble profession.
And groups like the Crossing don't exist in 25 years if that choir teacher doesn't go into that middle
No,
school, you know.
and that is,
Yeah,
that is
it's
a
all yeah, go ahead.
well, that's a noble profession. What I do isn't a noble profession. I'm in the entertainment industry. Um, but that's a noble profession. And so if I answer that question, yes, I bring a higher level because of my professional work. I want you to understand that I'm only talking about me. And I know that I do because the people around me in my professional world expect it
Right.
of me.
Right.
And I am in the entertainment business, and I do have to, I don't, I mean, I live in a very, we can get into this. I live in a very like weird parallel universes. So there's a lot of cognitive dissonance in my life because on the one hand, I care deeply about connecting with people, but on the other hand, I'm not the type of person that would ever ask an audience what they want. My programming is my painting, and I hope that you'll like it. But if you don't, there's other choirs. Go listen to them. I'm not gonna add red to the painting because you think you'd like some red in it.
Yeah. Ooh, that's interesting. And asking your programming approach was kind of on my list of things to talk about. So let's go there since you mentioned it. Um, so what I'm hearing you say is that you kind of think about a choral program. Let's say somebody comes to attend a concert, and the music from start to finish is an artistic expression that you have created and you use the example of the program as your painting. And in the same way, Van Gogh or somebody who sits down at a canvas to try to create art, they're not going to go out and take surveys between each brushstroke to see what people would like to see in the hopes that when the painting comes out, it's met well and with critical acclaim, etc. So, talk to us a little bit more about that philosophy as it relates to putting together a sequence of choral pieces to be heard live, or to maybe it's a recording or whatever it is. How do you approach that?
Well, so what we do as singers and conductors in the choral world is tell stories. Probably what we do in music throughout, regardless of whether it's texted or not, is tell stories.
Yeah.
Um, but we have the advantage of the fact that words are more readily associated with storytelling, and so we tell stories. And for me, programming is a form of storytelling. So sometimes, so the Crossing has commissioned a number of full concert length works to solve the problem that we have in that choral music for very practical reasons has a lot of 4-minute pieces of music, right? We have got a lot of motets and mass movements and little folk songs and all this kind of stuff that they were designed for different reasons, um, and not necessarily designed to appear on a concert. And we take them out of their context and we make concerts out of them. So one of the things that I've been trying to work on with the Crossing is to build a repertoire of pieces that don't require being strung together because they are a piece. You wouldn't go to the opera and go, tell me 18 stories.
Mm-hmm.
Um, And so, and then how are you going to string them together? Oh, well, they're all about, lilies, or they're all, and it just doesn't, so the larger, like the larger umbrella of storytelling, if I am working with shorter works, is really, really important to me, that there's a thread that people will go, I, I understand why these two pieces are together. And not only that, but I also understand something more about this topic because I didn't realize that those things were related. We're doing these pieces about Alzheimer's and aging right now. And there's these two big pieces, one by Rob Maggio, which is the setting of Dr. Alzheimer's journals about his first patient. And they're very clinical and they're kind of shocking. And then they're juxtaposed with her experience of like trying to like at one point, it's called The Woman Where We Were Living because at one point she's talking, he asked, well, what woman are you talking about? She says, the woman where we are living. And she's talking about herself.
Hmm.
And in the next piece by Stacey Garrett, which Scott Detroit plays the organ on, um, this is a piece of settings of Lydia Davis, and they're all about the metaphor of decay and disintegration, of houses falling apart and isolation and they're all about aging. And there are these moments that like kind of reference the same thing, just unwittingly, and it makes such a beautiful evening. It's such a beautiful story. And so I'm really, so when I approach a season, I approach like we have an umbrella topic. And then if you go to all of the concerts in the season, you hopefully will like understand why those pieces were related to each other. And
Ah,
then there's
okay.
a concert topic. And so then there's the story within the story kind of thing.
Yeah.
Um, and I mean, sometimes that's very loosely um, programmed, or sometimes the topic is purposefully, next season is going to end with this big thing about Immanuel Kant. And so the season, I'm calling the season Transcendental Idealists. And that's a pretty loose topic. Fit
Yeah.
most things in that story.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's how I see programming. It's really personal and very, I feel really intimate with the singers and then with the listeners when I'm planning them. And word, like particular words. I live with particular words for a long time, to try to figure out like what their meaning is in our world
Yeah.
today. Um,
So in your role as artistic director there at the Crossing specifically, um, do you create the programs entirely by yourself, or do you bounce ideas around off of people before you've come up with kind of like here's what we're doing? And I ask because lots of organizations, artistic directors do that differently. How do you handle it?
well, for the programming that is done like in-house, that's me. I do trust my team, but I don't think they've ever said anything about um
Like, hey, don't do
I don't
that
think they've ever
piece,
said
or
anything about like programming.
this
Yeah.
is a terrible idea.
Yeah, and I don't think it's ever happened,
Yeah.
although I have had terrible ideas. And it's
How
been
do you decide?
they're what?
I was going to say, how do you decide that the idea was terrible in
Well,
retrospect?
I mean, I once you decided because it was kind of a disaster in performance. So I,
Okay.
I once programmed for the Crossing at Christmas. So we have this thing called the Crossing at Christmas, but it's not about Christmas at all. It's about like our place in the world and our view of the other and how we interact with each other and connection. And because we don't really do sacred music hardly at all. And so I programmed Wolfgang Riem's Astralis, which is this piece for cello and choir, and it's just like wordless and it's got a bunch of chords, and this cello's like doing all these like scrapey harmonics and stuff. And I just loved this piece of music, and I thought that it would really land. And it was really, I was safe to say that it was not a popular piece. Um, and I'm glad we did it, but it was the singers who said, we didn't enjoy singing that piece, and let's talk about, you know why you really wanted to do that piece. So we did, we had this whole discussion about it, but I learned something about their aesthetic that is worth taking into account, because their aesthetic, it's important. If they don't love what they're doing, then we should close. So So, but most of the time, I run with it. But then what I was going to say is that then there's other things, like we get asked to do other stuff. We collaborate with the New York Philharmonic and Philadelphia, sorry, Los Angeles, and so those things also become a part of our season. And I try to find a way through language that they also live inside the topic, and that's when sometimes I have to be really creative to go like, well, what does a piece about the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire have to do with diaspora or whatever? I can't remember what we were doing that season that we did that piece of Julie Wolf's. Um, but but what's wonderful about it is that it usually winds up that those pieces that weren't necessarily our idea and that we're being hired to sing, they make the season so much richer because of the fact that we've had to search for a way to illuminate our own topic.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fascinating. I want to ask about one thing you threw in there. So you mentioned you don't do a lot of sacred music at the Crossing. Why? Is it because like everybody else already does that stuff and you're trying to fill a gap? Or is there just this is not part of our artistic vision. This is not why we exist. How would you explain that to somebody?
Well, I think that you could safely say that the Crossing grew out of the St. Mark's Locust Street Choir here in Philadelphia.
Okay.
Um, you know, the size of it, some of the sound of it, all that kind of stuff, the group originally. And so therefore there is a deep, deep sense of ritual in what we do, in everything that we do. And there is a deep connection to sacred music. And when we first started, we did a lot of stuff, especially in December. We did a lot of sacred music. But as we commissioned more and more music, I wasn't interested in commissioning sacred music because I don't. I'm a non-believer. It doesn't, the topics. I love the church. I freaking love working in the church. I love the liturgy, but there's plenty of people out there, commissioning Ave Marias, and they don't need the Crossing commissioning Ave
Yeah,
Marias.
that makes sense.
But there's
Hmm.
not a lot of people out there commissioning pieces about gun violence, and we get to do that. And so therefore we've just grown away from it, in the same way that one grows away from at times, their faith roots and finds other ways of connecting with their own spirituality and that of the world.
Right. So, yeah, so you mentioned gun violence, commissioning a piece about gun violence. How do you think of the Crossing's role in communicating? You say everything is telling a story. Is the story always a political one? Or do you have like other categories that your storytelling would fall into? How do you think of that?
So no, it's not always social relevance. I don't really see these pieces as political, but I understand. We live in a world where the topic itself, is like climate change is considered political. That's ridiculous. Climate change is scientific. It's not political. But it's viewed politically, right? So
Well,
therefore
because
we
the answer, yeah, because how we would solve that culturally would be political, right? So that it would require political action to do anything, and so I think that's where you jump into it becomes looped in. Same thing with gun violence. In order to do anything about it, we have to politically act, and I think that's why it gets lumped into that. But go ahead.
yes. So it just so happens that when you're telling the stories of our time in a journalistic way, many of the topics are considered political.
Yep. Yep.
So, as a result of that, I think that I am viewed by many as a person who commissions political pieces. Fine. It doesn't matter to me because I feel strongly about, my politics are on my shirt sleeve and I don't care. And, if you don't, you know, if you're, if you think that everybody in Philadelphia should be walking around with a gun in their holster, then you're probably not going to enjoy a Crossing concert to begin with. So, and I'm fine with that. So lots of those topics, come up with us. But the thing is that the important thing to note is that I am not interested in the political part of it because I'm not interested in answering questions. I don't know the answers to the questions, and it's not my job. I'm not a priest. I'm not a politician. It isn't my job to answer the questions. It is my job to ask the questions and to ask them in ways in which composers take their own, like perception, their sound world, their worldview, their intimacy, the thing that makes a piece, about one person because one person is composing it, and then that becomes universal because that's how art works, and um, and to turn those stories into pieces that basically says we're here and this is what it feels like to be here. And maybe someday some of those pieces will still be here to say we were here and this is what it felt like to be here.
Yeah.
Um, and that's my interest. And so yes, as a result of that, we are going to, do lots of pieces about environment and climate change and, wealth distribution and women and race and uh, gun violence and et cetera, because those are the stories. Particularly in an urban environment, those are the stories.
Yeah. Yeah, so it sounds like I'm really glad you said that. So your role is to ask the question, not to provide the answers, and that, and kind of thinking about that in the context of the choir's role too, and then the role of the program itself. So the role of the program is to get audience members thinking about these issues. And so I'm gonna kind of create a scenario, and I'm gonna see what you think.
Well, can I interrupt you for a
Yeah, go
second?
ahead. Hmm.
So I also don't really have the intention to to want to make them think about the issue, which I understand totally what you're saying. And
Yep.
what you said is more or less correct. But I think it's important to really contextualize what art is, like as an artist, I'm asked this question all the time. What do you want the audience to come away with from this piece? And I don't have an answer to that. That is not my job. My job is expression, presentation. And each person will take from it what they get from it. And some people will be very moved by an Alzheimer's piece. Some people will not. Some people will be kind of going like, heart wringing, all that kind of stuff. And so I don't think about that aspect of things. But I do want to say this, that why I seem very animated about this is because there are a whole lot of pieces out there in the choral world right now that basically do affirm people's moralities. They're pieces that basically say war is bad and peace is good. And I don't think we need to be told that. I think that we knew that before we could think. We're born with a certain morality.
Uh-huh.
So are dogs. Most animals know what's right and wrong. You don't need to be told this. So to have a piece of music and take 4 minutes of my time to tell me that war is bad and peace is good is just crap to me. And
I
I
agree.
I regret that we spend a lot of time listening and writing these pieces that affirm people's moralities instead of presenting scenarios in which we question what is morality actually, what is it?
Hmm. Yeah,
How
I
does it
think
operate?
those I think some of those pieces that you're talking about are attempts to get pats on the back. They're not really artistic expressions in the same way that you're talking about. And so I fully agree. In fact, that's kind of where I was going with what I was
Sorry,
asking
I interrupted.
before. No, I appreciate because you said it probably better than I would have said it. So I think that's really good. But I'm going to take what you just said back to the example of Van Gogh not sending out surveys for each of his brushstrokes that I was talking about before. I think it's a similar concept of like where a painter is going to create a painting and put it on the wall, and they're not even going to be there when you look at it. Like it's not their job to survey you after you look at it either and ask you what feelings did you feel while you were looking at my painting, and then someone says, oh well, I felt this, this, and this, and then you were to say, well, no, that's not what you're supposed to feel. You're supposed to feel Y, Z, and X, and you felt the wrong thing. No artist would even dream of doing that. And I think when we do music, maybe because we have to all be in the same room at the same time, it's a little bit more tempting for the artist to prescribe the reaction and to ask for a certain type of reaction. Thoughts about that?
I think if we're being really um, honest in our music making, that we're trying to get to the essence of the piece, and we're trying to sing it really well, which I know sounds really very simple and basic, but what we do is an incredibly imprecise art, and it is pretty simple and basic. And in that it draws on like this thing that's very animate.
Hmm.
It's like a thing that the breath that makes us not inanimate. And um, that I think that our job through presentation and programming and performance, if you call it that, um, is one of truly trying to be who we are in the moment and who we are in this story, and to understand our place in the story, and also the intention of the storyteller, who is the creative person, and then people connect to that. So one of the things, I hate to be sung at. Um,
Yeah.
and I really and there's a really very clear distinction between a singer or a choir that is singing at you, and a singer or a choir who is singing because they love to sing. And it's the opera singer who isn't really trying to project to you that you want to go crawl up on the stage and sit at their feet and say, "Sing to me all day.
Mm.
I like the stories and the way that you tell them." And it's the opera singer that's bellowing on the stage that you go, "Well, that's an impressive feat. I don't really understand what it has to do with me, or like
Yeah.
what I would recognize in what you're doing, that I would come away like a better person for it." But
Right. It's like watching an athlete sometimes.
yeah, what's moving about athletes is the challenge and the potential failure and the truth of the moment.
Yeah.
The 25 years of training that result in no medal.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's that's moving.
That's why we watch.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Or the person who gets the goal because they just weren't going to give up.
Yeah. Yep.
We watch them because of stories. There's a great drama that happens in sport. Let's not get off of that. But so what we do is everything that we're doing is mini dramas, right? We're constantly telling stories, that we're hoping that people will um, find something in that they relate,
Yeah.
but not because we tried to do that, but because we were being honest.
Yeah. Yeah, and transparent. That's wonderful. So let's talk about that with motion studies. You guys have a new album, and I'm assuming that, like the conversation we've just had, that this album has a story. Why don't you talk to us about that? What are you trying to communicate to somebody who listens to this?
So this album really has two stories, and they're two stories about um, the world we live in right now. Um, the first story is, um, I don't actually remember what order they're in on the album, but at any rate, Justine Chen's piece, "Shallow Breath and Stealth," it's based on this book by Jenna Osman, who is coincidentally a poet here in Philadelphia. Um, but I know her work really well. I did a piece previously with Ted Hearn based on her work. And um, and she is kind of a poet and a historian. She collects all this information. She makes these books that are like part poetry and part history, and the history of it can be really frightening. So in this book, Motion Studies, she tells the story of data collection from the very beginning of like recording what's going to become photography, and then it eventually becomes recording other things like voices, and eventually becomes data collection, and eventually comes to where we are now. And she references in it the book, Minority Report, which is basically like you know data collection gone crazy, so that there's these little mechanical bugs that like can sneak in your home and look in your eye and identify who you are, and all this kind of thing. And it's an absolutely frightening scenario. And what's mostly frightening about it is that it's almost where we are. It's like really close to where we are, and we're all completely complicit in it, because I think it's really convenient to not have to put my number in every time I want to code into my phone. It's very convenient to just look at my phone. But that means that the ship has sailed for me on whether I can ever get that back, because I will never
Mm-hmm.
get that back.
Mm-hmm.
So this piece, which Justine, so first of all, Justine was like, you want me to what? Like write a piece about this book, because this is crazy. And she made this wonderful libretto with me, and then really massaged it into kind of like songs almost. And there's like the sound of data collection, and there's the sound of an interrogation, like actual interrogation. There's a sound of salesmanship, and all of that floating in these beds of like, some sound worlds that we recognize as very mechanical, and some sound worlds that we recognize as very nostalgic, and the danger of nostalgia in music, touching on that issue of how that gets back to that other thing about these pieces that affirm people's morality. And they affirm one of the ways they do that is to like only use nostalgia in the musical language. Anyway, and so it basically, without telling a linear story, it takes like scenes from the narrative and it goes back and forth between building toward the struggle of these two people that are trying to like escape this world,
Mm.
and their very personal experience, and the fact that they are actually afraid to breathe, because if they breathe, the devices on them will let the people that are watching them or searching for them know where they are.
Mm.
And so think about that.
Yeah. So, real quick before you continue, so there might be an obvious answer to this, and I just missed it. But help me understand the title specifically. When the book talks about motion studies, what motion is being studied?
So the very beginning of data collection started with motion study. It's those recreating, like I can't remember the name of it. I apologize. Where it's the wheel with slits in it, and
Okay,
you can sort of almost imitate photography, and that turns into photography, and photography is data collection,
I
um,
see. Okay.
and and so it's all, and the beginning of that was about trying to capture, like, how does a horse move? Well, photography shows us, is able to break that down for us in ways that we can't, because we can't stop time, right? But photography stops time, so we can see, oh, that's what the leg is actually doing
Mm-hmm.
in the
Mm-hmm.
motion of this bird or this person or this whatever. And that study is one of the things that has led us to today, is the desire to know how things move. Um, and so fast forward today, motion studies is like, if you are moving, you are being seen. Um, and all of the ways in between, all of which we rejoice in. It's great to have a tape recorder in the 1960s. It's really cool.
Yeah.
Um, but be careful what you write down. So, so
So
this
so the
is
album.
really kind of brilliant, because it's, all that sounds like, oh, I don't want to go see a horror movie. That's a piece of music, but it's not that at all, because Justine's a fantastic dramatist, really great drama. In fact, why I know her is I did this piece with my choir at Northwestern, at the Chicago Opera Theater. We did a big stage, not stage, concert version workshop performance of her opera, The Life and Deaths of Alan Turing. Again, obviously Justine is interested in data. Um, and so anyway, that's basically what that piece is.
Okay, so it's kind of like you said kind of transformed through a libretto from a book. So is the entire album simply a story from start to finish?
No, I wouldn't say it is, because the other piece is about water. And it's not really, they're not really necessarily related to each other
I see.
in theme.
Hmm.
That piece by Nick Klein is called Watersheds. And um, it's probably the only choral piece I know. Well, it is the only choral piece I know, and probably the only choral piece that exists that begins with a 14-minute tenor saxophone solo that uses multiphonics and electronic feedback.
Huh.
And it's a pretty awesome opening, and that's actually about water wicking. That his grandfather was a water wicker, an actual water wicker, and this dichotomy of the fact that, does water wicking work, and the answer to water wicking work is always it has to.
Yeah.
So so there's something really beautiful about opening with this, reference to all that. But then there's all these different environmentalists that he called their short sentences and offer, a view of water essentially in the United States. So there's, the American government's, pamphlet that says, go west because, water follows the plow. Well, it turns out that water does not follow the plow. And just ripping the surface off of everything in the Midwest turned out to be not a good idea, because the Dust Bowls started, and it made everybody's life miserable, and you couldn't farm anymore, and they moved to California where there were amazing floods. You might have read The Grapes of Wrath. So
Hmm. Hmm.
so so that novel basically tells that story. But at any rate, it talks about that. It talks about Mears, connection with water. It talks about Rachel Carson's, how everything is related. Anything that happens to the water happens to us. And it's there's a stillness about it. Nick is capable of finding these beautiful, beautiful stillnesses. And the last movement actually involves a very, very light sound of rain. It's Thoreau saying that he's not going to be able to go out for his walk today because it's raining, and he's kind of a little cranky. But he says, "But if it's good for the grass, then it's good for me."
Yeah.
And
Yeah. That's great. That's
that's the end of
awesome.
the piece. So.
That's very cool. So, Donald, this has been really, really fascinating. I want to wrap it up with just you giving us some information that we might need to know to learn more about the crossing, about your work, about albums, etc. Where do we go to find that stuff? And I'll try to direct some people your way.
So crossingchoir.org, everything's there. All of our projects, all of our albums, links to our albums, our 72 episode Rising with the Crossing, that was our daily pandemic mailing that has been archived at the Library of Congress, is all there. Yeah, just you can spend a long, long time. Plus all our 32 albums are available on, wherever you stream music. And that's, YouTube, whatever, all those places, and yeah, that's it. I just encourage you to go to crosswire.org projects, and there you'll find like just rabbit hole after rabbit hole of fun.
Yeah. Okay. I have one more question. And it's kind of out there in the sense of your answer could go any direction. So let's say somebody hears this episode, they've never heard the crossing before, and they hear you talking about it. They hear oh, this is interesting. I'd like to hear a choir that's like this, and they go listen to the crossing, regardless of which album. What would be something that you would hope that a person listening would notice about the sound of the choir? Forget about the storytelling and the messaging and all that stuff, but what are some of the things that you're proud of about the way the crossing sounds?
Um, that um, it That's a good question. Um, you know, I don't allow myself pride. Um, I would say that what I am aware of, and what other people tell me that they are aware of, is the way in which we listen to each other, and as a result of that, the way in which a listener listens to our music.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't, I probably don't want to say anything more than that, but there's a certain, conducting is my safe space. And there's a certain place that I think that we all find together, especially in recording sessions, that is it's really internal.
Yeah.
And I'm very grateful for the fact that my life has allowed for that on a daily basis.
That's beautiful. Very well said, Donald. Thank you so much for spending an hour with me.
Thank you.
Thank you all for listening to this episode. As always, the way that we keep Choralosophy moving into the future. We just hit 5 years, and the way we hit 5 more years and continue to grow and expand, the way that this platform can be valuable to you, the listener, and can continue to be valuable to the music education landscape is you being involved. The ways that you can be involved, of course, are entering the Choralosophy promo code at all the websites that allow that. They are amazing partners that have been with us mostly since the beginning. That's SiteReadingFactory.com, MyMusicFolders.com. That is also EndeavorPublishing.com and GraphitePublishing.com. You can also, of course, go over to Ludus and check out their products. You can do the things directly for the show that help, like go to patreon.com/Choralosophy and chip in $3 a month. And if you can't do any of those things, I just want you to join the conversation. So head on over to the Choralosophers Facebook page, like, share, leave comments anywhere that you're able to see the content. Those help other people see the content and join the conversation as well. We are building a movement here, and we want you to be a part of it. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next time.